This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for floor remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer during the 119th Congress. On March 6th, Thune highlighted figures from the border and the Halt Fentanyl Act, then pending hours before a related procedural vote. The following material is protected by copyright.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in just a few short weeks, President Trump has restored order to the southern border. If initial reports are accurate, approximately 8,450 illegal immigrants were apprehended trying to cross the border last month. Not long ago, Border Patrol would sometimes apprehend that many illegal immigrants in a single day. With less chaos, Border Patrol can focus on the criminals, cartels, terrorists, and traffickers that are used to try to hide behind the surges. And that makes our country safer. But we have more work to do, Mr. President. Illegal drugs continue to plague too many communities and take too many Americans' lives. More Americans die of drug overdoses each year than Americans who died in the entirety of the Vietnam War. The New England Journal of Medicine estimated that 22 teenagers died of overdoses each week in 2022. That's an entire high school classroom lost every week to the scourge of drugs. And so many of these tragedies are from a lethal dose of fentanyl in a single pill. Fentanyl that can frequently be traced back to the southern border. Mr. President, this crisis is affecting every part of the country. We've seen it in South Dakota. Police in Sioux Falls seized enough fentanyl to kill 2.5 million people last year. Law enforcement reports that the cartels have a presence in our area. And the price of a single pill has dropped from $40 a few years ago to $5 per pill today, largely because of increasing supply. I'm grateful for the men and women in law enforcement and first responders who work every day to save lives. And we need to help them get these drugs off our streets and prevent more overdose deaths. The President is already taking major steps to halt the supply of drugs flowing across our borders. And later today, the Senate will vote to begin consideration of the Halt Fentanyl Act, which will provide law enforcement with a critical tool to combat fentanyl. Until a few years ago, the fentanyl analogs that have killed so many Americans were generally classified as Schedule II substances, meaning they were less tightly regulated and violations carried lighter penalties. And if a particular analog was moved to Schedule I, cartels would slightly alter the chemical composition of their fentanyl, equivalents to avoid a crackdown, changes that made those drugs no less deadly. But in 2018, President Trump put a stop to that. All fentanyl analogs were temporarily reclassified as Schedule I drugs, enabling law enforcement to go after the people bringing this poison into our communities. Congress has extended this provision several times because it works, but the most recent extension expires at the end of this month. And it's time that all fentanyl analogs are permanently classified as what they are, the most deadly kind of drugs. Our colleagues, Senator Cassidy, Grassley, and Heinrich, have put forward a bill to do just that, expanding on Senator Johnson's leadership in this area and Senator Graham's good work. The Halt Fentanyl Act would permanently list fentanyl analogs on Schedule I. Doing this will help law enforcement keep pace with the evolving threat, fentanyl, that is driving drug overdoses in our country. And it has backing from a number of state attorneys general and from law enforcement. Attorney General Bondi has endorsed the bill. And it has bipartisan support here in Congress, including bipartisan co-sponsorship and strong bipartisan votes in both the Senate Judiciary Committee and in the House of Representatives. Mr. President, I'm also proud that this bill has come to the Senate floor through regular order. The Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on fentanyl where members heard the heartbreaking stories of lives taken or changed forever by deadly fentanyl analogs. The committee held a markup and reported the bill to the floor by a bipartisan vote of 16-5. And now we're going to have a debate on the bill here on the floor of the United States Senate. And I hope that in the coming days, we will have a productive process to make a law that will save American lives. And so, Mr. President, I thank Senators Cassidy, Grassley, and Heinrich for their leadership on this issue, and Senators Johnson and Graham for their work as well. And I'm looking forward to sending the HALT Fentanyl Act to President Trump's desk soon.
Schumer derided Education Secretary Linda McMahon after reports that President Trump was planning to issue an executive order directing her to wind down the department.
Well, Mr. President, last night, reports came out that President Trump is preparing to sign an executive order to end the Department of Education as soon as today. If this report is true, this would be one of the most destructive and devastating steps Donald Trump has ever taken. And the main victims of this decision, American children. The right here is why every single Democrat said hell no to the nomination of Linda McMahon. This is why we did it. She's an education secretary. Linda McMahon is an education secretary who personifies nails on the chalkboard. I've never heard before of a secretary who wanted a cabinet job solely for the purpose of detonating the very agency she seeks to lead. I've never heard of an education secretary who wants to give every teacher in America a rotten apple. But this is where we are. These are not just metaphors of the moment. They're the perils of the present. This would be horrible for our schools, our school leaders, our families, and the children Secretary McMahon is supposed to serve. The blast radius of this order will harm nearly every child, every teacher, every family, and every community in the country. And don't forget, defunding education means property taxes will go up to make up the funding gap. Homeowners are about to get blindsided by the toxic brew of seeing their property taxes go up while seeing the quality of many schools that depend on funding go down. But nobody will suffer more from Donald Trump's decision than our kids. Almost 90% of the students in America attend public schools, and they will suffer because of what Donald Trump is doing. Why? The Department of Education is a lifeline for public schools across the country. It's particularly strong in rural areas because there's not much choice. There's one school in the town. With federal funding, many rural schools would vanish and some schools would crumble at the foundation, literally. Education is the best investment for turning a struggling community around. With good schools and without the funding to support these schools, our children will be hurt, our country will be worse, the notion of the American dream will fall by the wayside. Rural schools will be particularly hard hit because rural communities often have only one school in the area. And if that disappears, the communities will deteriorate. Kids with special education needs will be left out in the cold. Public school teachers, already worked to the bone, will be thrown into chaos. Class sizes will explode. Job training programs will vanish. School districts will be at the mercy of state budgets that already struggle to fund education. And the albatross of student debt will become insurmountable for tens of millions of Americans, many of whom come from working families. Every single one of us wants our schools to do better, our students to perform better, and eliminate wasteful spending. Education reform is necessary. But to make things better, to improve education, you do not use a chainsaw. Using a chainsaw will make things worse, because it doesn't discriminate between the funds that are needed and the funds that may be unnecessary or should be redirected. Erasing the Department of Education in the blink of an eye is not what education reform looks like. Donald Trump should immediately reverse course before he causes irreparable harm to our students and our classrooms. Again, let me just repeat that you do not hire a secretary who whose very purpose is detonating the very agency she seeks to lead. That makes no sense. Now, on Social Security, I want to point my colleagues to a profoundly disturbing report this morning in the Washington Post. This morning, we learned that the acting head of the Social Security Administration admitted what many of us fear. DOGE is calling the shots, and their mistakes are going to put benefits in danger, Social Security benefits in danger. Listen to these stunning quotes from the acting head of the Social Security Administration. He says, quote, "Things are currently operating in a way I've never seen in government before," unquote. He says DOGE are, quote, "outsiders who are unfamiliar with the nuances of Social Security programs," unquote. And he admits, quote, "they will make mistakes." Well, that's unacceptable. Social Security is perhaps the most sacrosanct program in government. It's helped seniors and people with disabilities for close to a century. And now, for the first time, DOGE is putting Social Security benefits in real danger. And the American people are frightened and outraged at the same time. DOGE is spreading outlandish lies about fraud and waste that we all know doesn't actually exist. They're cherry-picking data to spin a fantasy detached from reality so they can, again, use that chainsaw. Social Security is the last place where a chainsaw should be used. Mr. President, the Senate, Democrats and Republicans need to wake up to this crisis. It's a disaster waiting to happen. I urge my Republican colleagues, are you all fine with this? Are you comfortable letting Elon Musk and a bunch of inexperienced people bulldoze their way through Social Security benefits? Mark my words, if DOGE's chainsaw approach leads to people missing their checks, the uproar from people back home will make all of Washington, D.C. go deaf. And let's not kid ourselves. This is all part of the plan for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and DOGE are coming for people's security benefits. They want to hide behind the boogeyman of fraud we all know doesn't exist in order to justify stealing people's checks. And they're already doing it. Cutting 7,000 employees from SSA is a benefit cut. Closing field offices and eliminating customer service staff is a benefit cut. And I am alarmed this only might be the beginning.
Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Thank you for listening.